Hello, Mr. Condon. I'm very glad to meet you. I want to talk with you today about your very interesting riding in the zone techniques. But first, I want to ask you, please, about your passion for motorcycles. How did you become a motorcycle trainer? When was the start of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I oftentimes think back on it when I'm asked that question. It started really when my father brought home a small motorcycle that my brother and I shared. And then I pretty quickly found it to be something that I got a lot out of, including working on them. I really enjoyed anything that involved motorcycles. And then as I got older, I rode more. I started discovering touring with some friends who had already done some touring. And then from there, I started racing. Now, this is road racing, like MotoGP type racing. So it'd be knee dragging on pavement. I did that in the mid 80s. And that was when I really I understood that I needed to up my game or to get better at my skills. Because the whole goal of competition is to finish in front of the person behind you. And I learned that there was more to riding a motorcycle than just simply twisting the throttle and pointing it in the general direction you want to go. So that really was what started the idea that there's a lot more to learn. And so from there, soon after, I guess, no, it was about 10 years later, I became an instructor to train new riders and how to become motorcyclists and also to help them get licensed in the state that I live in. So it's a national organization called the Motorcycle Safety Foundation. And so I was an instructor for about 25 years doing that. So it was that passion for really understanding just how deep, like I like to say, how deep the well is that you can dip into, that there's just so much more to learn all the time. And it's what keeps it interesting.
You are the author of two books, Motorcycling the Right Way and Riding the Zone. And I'm very interested about your riding in the zone. So please tell me, what kind of zone is this? Can you please explain the main concept of it?
Sure. Yeah. So if you talk to an athlete, they will oftentimes refer to being in the zone. And that's a condition where all things align, your skills, your attention span, just how things are going physically and mentally. And it's that sensation that you're almost transformed into more of an experience, much more than just riding a motorcycle. And so some people might describe it as meditative. It can be, and it can be that way in brief moments. And that's oftentimes the case, is that it's very hard to really conjure or to really pull that condition up. It kind of comes and it's fleeting. So it kind of comes and goes. And what I talk about in the book are the conditions that can make it more likely that you'll experience the zone. And that includes physical techniques, but also mental techniques. And we can talk more about that. But the zone itself is more of an idea that you're in the groove. Sometimes they'll say that your mind is fully occupied with the activity of riding. And so it transcends, anything beyond that would take up a lot of your mental bandwidth. That what you're doing is you're just focused, and it comes, and like I say, it's usually fleeting. It comes and then it disappears, and then it can happen for a while throughout a day. It might only happen typically for less than an hour, less than half hour. It could only be just a series of corners, and that's where you're just you're hitting every mark. Your timing is perfect. Your vision is up, and it feels slow, but you're actually going fast. That's more of a reference for riding on the racetrack, where speed is more of a measure than on the street. So it's something to strive for, because it brings motorcycling beyond just operating a two-wheeled machine. It makes it so that it's an experience that most people don't experience, particularly not on the roads. You can experience it in many other ways. Like I say, I mentioned athletes. You can also experience it when you're put into a situation that requires of you some very high level thinking and high level physical action. And so that you can get brought into it, and suddenly you're just so focused on what you do that itself can then bring the conditions to a point where you can feel the zone as we talk about it.
And how did you make your riding in the zone? Was it from your self-observation, or maybe you used some science base for it?
Yeah, no, it was pretty much the idea that I recognized when I was in the zone. I recognized that that was a condition that most people find to be pleasurable. So I knew that there had to have been some things that would help make the zone happen. And that's when I started focusing on that. Scientifically, the only thing that I really would attribute to that level of thought process is the techniques themselves and working on the physics of how a motorcycle operates and what happens by cause and effect. And this is a big part of what I talk about, both when I do my street training, which I have a school, Riding in the Zone, and I do street training, and I also do racetrack training. And more times than not, what I'm really trying to get somebody to pay attention to at a very high level is how the motorcycle is feeling underneath you, and how when you do this thing with the throttle, you can expect this result. And it's because of dynamics, the motorcycle dynamics and the physics of it and how it's designed, including the tires. When you get into a corner, a very experienced and expert rider knows that they can relax their arms once they're leaned over. And there's a dynamic about that. That's the shape of the tires, that once they're on the side, then they kind of do the rest of the work. It's almost like when you put a coffee cup or some sort of cup that's shaped like this, and you put it on its side and you push it, it's going to go around the circle all by itself. And that's called a camber thrust. So those are the sort of things that if you're aware of it, then it makes it so that even if you're skeptical, it can make you try it and then get an idea that, wow, okay, it really works. Because particularly with newer riders, to be relaxed in a corner is very difficult. And you can't just tell them, well, relax, because they don't understand why they can relax. So in that way, the science is really more like physics and the dynamics of how a motorcycle works, including a lot of the technique that I talk about a lot is trail braking. And what that's about is breaking into a corner. And the benefits of it are certainly that you give yourself more time and space to, what would I say, adjust your entry speed to a more precise level. So instead of letting off the brakes before you turn in, you stay on the brakes as you turn in, and then it's a smoother entry. And that now talks about the dynamics of the motorcycle, because when you use the brakes, the front suspension compresses, and then if you were to let go, it's going to rebound, and then you turn in, it's going to compress again, and you get on the gas, it's going to rebound. So if you hold the brakes, it's going to be compression, and then it holds the compression of the suspension down as you turn in, and then it's one extension of the forks, the rebound, as you accelerate out. So at a very high level, when I'm on the racetrack and I'm using every inch of the tire, and I can't really afford to be sort of abrupt with any of my inputs, and I need to make sure that I load the tire and unload the tire just so at just the right time. And that's a technique that helps to do that.
Am I correct, Sam, that you put a lot of weight on the rider's cognitive biases? Do you consider that this is one of the most important riders' problems about their false beliefs and all that?
Yes, yeah, and that's great, and that's really why I focused my Riding in the Zone book on the more feelings and perceptions of what we think we know about riding. So what ends up happening when it comes to some of the advanced training that I offer, the biggest challenge is actually getting people to consider doing it. Most riders do not follow up and become with more advanced training. They learn how to operate the motorcycle and they sort of struggle along, and they feel that most have a perception that that's just how riding a motorcycle feels. It's that sometimes, you feel good, sometimes you feel bad, you feel, anxious in the highway or maybe in corners, and that's just how it goes. But that's not the case. So that perception is the first one that we struggle to change, so that people understand that, well, there's something I can do to make this more enjoyable and safer. Yes, you're going to be safer, but think about it as the motivation is that it's going to be more enjoyable. And that's again what the zone is. The zone is an enjoyment, a measure of enjoyment. So the idea that that we can see the world, but see motorcycling in our own way, through the eyes of maybe an expert, and they understand that you can watch them and say, wow, how do they do that so smoothly, or how can they go so much faster than I can on the racetrack? And that's where the techniques come in. And so there's a perception that oftentimes in the racetrack, students will think that they're going super fast and that they're on the very edge of control. And then an instructor will go by with one hand and give a thumbs up, and they're blown away that how can that possibly be? And that's sort of helps to open their eyes to the perception that there's way more to learn than what you think you know. And there's a saying that I often use, which says, you only know, you don't know what you don't know. So we can't really measure just how broad the range of skill development there is out there for riding a motorcycle. And so the perception, again, when we're riding, we can feel, it's really important to be mindful of how you are feeling physically and mentally. And that's much more about, are you feeling tension? Are you feeling tension in the handlebars? Are you being a little bit behind with your timing, so that you're turning in a little too early or a little too late? Now, the other question about that is that if I were to ask somebody, well, why do you think you went wide in that corner? They won't be able to answer, because they don't know. They don't know what they did wrong, because they don't know exactly how to do it right. And so that's where it comes into that study, whether it's reading a book or going to a course or watching YouTube. That's great. It gives you an idea that there's a lot more to learn, but you really have to make it your own technique, something that you can rely on. You need to practice, and it has to be conscious, purposeful practice. And what I mean by that is that it's one thing to just say that seat time or experience time on the motorcycle is going to make you a better rider. That's not necessarily the case. If you are using seat time, that's a thoughtful, mindful amount of seat time where you're thinking about, what's going on with the motorcycle, what your strategies are. And that's another big part of what I talk about. And in talking about the mental aspect of riding a motorcycle is strategies for being able to manage certain types of corners, managing traffic. So these strategies have to be thought through before you need them, because in the heat of the moment, you're going to panic or react the way you're trained. And if you're not trained, you're going to react like a human being reacts, and we grab brakes and we panic and we stand the motorcycle up and we go off the road. So this is something that has to be trained before you need it. So yeah, the big part, motorcycling is so much more mental really than physical, because I can teach you to operate a motorcycle in an afternoon. You would be able to stop, go, corner to some proficiency in one afternoon, 2 hours. I could have you doing that. That's not riding a motorcycle, that's operating a motorcycle. A whole bunch else goes on where you need to be able to see what's going on, predict the situation, and to understand what your options are in case, it's just so you can keep yourself safe. So that is a big part of what I do, is to try to make people mindful and aware.
You said in one video, I'm so glad to know what I'm doing because it wouldn't be so much fun.
I remember that video. My wife was on the back and we were in, I forget, Idaho, I think. And actually it was in where the Black Hills. And so we had just seen Mount Rushmore and there were these nice twisty roads, Iron Mountain, I believe. And there was a couple tricky turns and that just came to mind. I'm like, wow, I kind of know what I'm doing here. And the thing is that even though even though I've been at this for 40 years, consciously riding better and teaching people how to ride better, I am still aware that there's more to learn. And so there's a speaking of science, there's a study, I guess it would be a theory, called the Dunning-Krueger effect. And it's two scientists. And this effect is the measure of people's perceived competence. So when you're a new rider and you've gotten the operation of the motorcycle pretty well worked out, then you go off and you ride and you have fun and you don't get into any accidents, you don't crash the motorcycle, you're doing really good. At that stage of a rider's career, if we want to call it a career, they feel pretty confident and they feel like they've learned 90% of what there is to learn, because they're getting, they're experiencing it in their own way. And so it's a curve as they start to go, early riders will go up, with their confidence and their perceived confidence. And then as you start to become actually more confident and more learned and understand physical skills better, you start to plateau and then you start coming down. The most expert masters feel as though they're not as good as they actually are. So newer riders think they're better than they actually are. Veteran and master riders think that there's still more to learn because they understand there's been so much more to learn to get to where they are now that there's got to be more. And there is, to a point where you then have to decide, what are your goals? Because at this point here, I could learn to go faster on a motorcycle. But the reason on the racetrack I want to talk about, the only reason I would really need to do that is if for some reason I wasn't able to do my job and train the fastest track day riders, because I train on track days, which are more fun days, not racing anymore. If I was unable to keep up with the faster riders to do my job, then I would need to, become better and learn more about how I can be safely going faster. Because at my age, crashing becomes much more of a negative consequence than when I was younger. Now, if I were to go back racing, then I would definitely have to remind myself of the more advanced techniques that typically you definitely don't need on the street, but that when you're at that very edge of competition and you want to win, that you have to really be really precise. And that's what would drive me to become, better at that. So anyhow, it's really important for newer riders to understand that at that point where you feel confident and that you've kind of have everything figured out, that's the most dangerous point of your career, of your riding, because that's when you think you know everything. So then you start riding faster, you start riding in more challenging environments, and then you get yourself in trouble because you actually don't understand how you could have managed that situation better. And also, if something does happen and you need to avoid, say like a mid-corner obstacle, sand in the road, that you may not actually have the skills or the knowledge to be able to avoid that. And so then you crash. You're the one who crashes because you're the newer rider. The expert rider had no problem getting around it. So that's where you can get the idea of comparing a newer rider who thinks they know all they need to know and a more experienced rider who masters the whole range of what it takes to ride a motorcycle really well.
Like you said, you need to have highest level of skills. You can don't use it, but you need to have all that highest levels.
That's exactly right. And so that's actually a phrase I often use, is that the best riders have the most advanced techniques, and then the best riders never have to use them. So, but that's a reason why you actually have to keep them practiced, because we say that these techniques are perishable. So they'll go stale, they'll start to, you won't be as skilled at it if you just let it go. You learn something and then you never practice it again. That level of competence will go away. You will start to, it won't be part of your muscle memory. Another way to think about, what we do is that muscle memory, that in an event of an emergency, you don't have time to think. It has to be reactive, and you train for what the reaction will be for what you trained in. So if you've trained in emergency braking at a very high level at speed, something that I do with my students is to come to an emergency stop from a more normal speed, maybe 100 kilometers an hour, and then come to a stop, an emergency stop. And then that's when you're going to get a feel for just what it feels like and what it takes to get that motorcycle stopped in time. If you've never practiced that, and then you're presented with a situation where you absolutely have to get this motorcycle stopped, it's the chances of you doing it correctly and most efficiently are pretty slim, but if you've practiced it, the chances of you acting correctly and not crashing, not skidding, and hopefully stopping in time before you impact the obstacle, it goes way, way, way up. So
Mr. Condon, do I understand correctly that riding in the zone is some kind of having that mystic connection, relationship between you and your bike?
Yeah, and that's essentially what it is. If you think about any activity that you've done in the past, it can be dancing, it can be skiing, it can be any number of things where you just know you're doing it perfectly. And if not perfectly, at least you're as perfect as you can understand what perfection is, so that you go into a corner and you turned in at exactly the right time. And you know that because your exit is perfect and you got on the gas just at the right time. The motorcycle is fluid because of how the timing and of your actions and how refined your actions are, that the motorcycle is going to feel stable and smooth. And your line, if somebody were to watch you from behind, would say, wow, that was really a beautiful thing that just happened there. Now that's what you would recognize at some point when you understand that why it happened. A lot of people who are riding, they'll go through a corner and they'll say, wow, that felt really good. And then I'll ask them why, and they won't know. So that's where understanding how the motorcycle works and what are the conditions that make it so that you have that positive feeling, that feeling that is very transcendent, and also almost makes you feel as though you've transcended to another dimension where it's not just operating a motorcycle, it's not just getting to the next place. It's where you went through this and you went, wow, a bell rung. It was absolutely like you nailed it, right? So that's really how I see riding in the zone. And again, it's going to happen the more that you apply the techniques and the strategies that allow you to feel really confident, that and so that you understand that what I'm doing here on this motorcycle is the optimum way that this motorcycle wants to operate. It will reward me with stability and with the sense that I'm just ahead of what's going on. And what I mean by that is your vision. One of the things that I work on a lot with riders, both street and track, is their vision. So the idea of looking well ahead, but not only just looking well ahead, but knowing what to look for. So I talk about that a lot on the YouTube videos. Once you have your eyes up, everything slows down. A perception of it slowing down. So that's where oftentimes the faster lap times, when we're talking racing, oftentimes come when you're feeling slow. Like if you were to come off the track and you say, wow, that was kind of a slow lap, and you look at your lap time and go, wow, I just did a personal best. How is that? it's because the condition was there that you let things happen. Your body was relaxed. You knew exactly what to do when, and that's when you're going to feel the most relaxed. Doesn't mean that you can't muscle through to get a good lap time, but it's not going to be your best lap time, and it's not going to be enjoyable. And it could very well be that you're having more risk, because when you're not smooth, your risk goes up of losing traction, especially when we're on the racetrack and we're at the very edge of the traction. Now on the street, that's not what our goal is. Our goal is to be safe and have fun. The same things apply though. It's just that when it comes to strategies on the street, the cornering line that you choose, the entry location in your lane, the speed that you enter, the vision that you use, the timing, all that still applies. So when I do training for street riders on the racetrack, I tell them outright that these techniques are not race techniques. They are motorcycle mastering techniques. So if you get these concepts right, you can apply them to any motorcycle that you ride.
So it's all about be conscious and relax. And many riders, they think about fun, how to have fun, but they don't think about how to be safe. And this is one of the problem, I guess. Yeah.
So one thing about that, though, is as motorcycle riders, we don't ride to be safe. So being safe isn't a goal. Coming home at the end of the day is. So now how's that different? Well, part of the draw to riding a motorcycle, part of the attraction is the fact that it's a little risky. There's a risk to it. There's a challenge to jumping on a motorcycle and then going through space at a speed that could hurt you. That's something that, we're drawn to. Not everybody is, and that's why not everybody rides a motorcycle. Now, there are a lot of reasons to ride a motorcycle. Sometimes it's just a commute. It's the easiest and most inexpensive way to get to work and to get home. And so it's transportation only. And in much of the world, motorcycles and motor scooters, they are transportation. So even so, that there's a benefit for everybody who rides a two-wheeled vehicle to understand how they work and what they, how to make it so that you can be as safe as you can. Now, for safety, riding on the street you're not going to have fun if you feel like people are always out to kill you. So there's a saying a lot of people say, a strategy is to pretend everybody's out to kill you. Well, I don't really buy into that, because what fun is that, first of all? And it's not true. People don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go out and kill myself a motorcyclist. So that's not what's happening. So your goal and your strategy is to help them be successful and to not let them ruin your day. So you see, you're now taking control of what a lot of people perceive as a situation or a scenario that they had no control over. So there are times when that happens. Don't get me wrong. But more times than not, when people tell me about their crashes, give me an idea what happened. And either they say, I don't know, and said, well, that's a problem. You have to know what happened. And even if it's a driver who car pulls in front of you, which is very common, they turn into your path of travel at an intersection, that there are ways that you can predict that. And there are things that you can do to minimize either the letting the situation happen, or to minimize the injury that might happen if you do hit the vehicle. Part of that is wearing proper gear, protective gear. And so that's another attitude thing, is that, yes, we all want to be able to get on our motorcycles and feel free and not be encumbered by heavy jackets and big helmets and, especially when it's hot outside. But that's an attitude that needs to be adapted if you're going to get to the level of confidence and mastery, to respect the risks. And the risks are high. And for you to find a way to protect yourself with personal protective gear in all conditions and in all temperatures, that's something that is a high goal that should be there. That's passive in that you're wearing gear, and bright colored gear is helpful. But what I focus on much more is taking control and having strategies that make it so that you are allowing the other drivers to see you easier, and that you position yourself in the lane so that if they don't see you, that you have options. So that's really the big part. And it's much more about, you mentioned earlier about to be focused and then to relax. That's something that you can't really will yourself to relax. You can remind yourself that you're tense, like on the handlebars, you're feeling like you're gripping the handlebars. You can say, oh, stop gripping. And then you can do that. But guess what? You're going to grip again, because how you feel at the time made you grip the handlebars. Well, how do you fix that? Yeah. So then you're talking about the strategies and the techniques that lead to you being able to be relaxed. So that's what I talk about with the book, is like lane positioning and braking techniques and throttle techniques and vision. All those things are what are going to make it so that you can actually relax if you are able to practice and put into practice these techniques.
Mr. Condon, in your opinion, what are the most common reasons why riders get into accidents?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have an article about more than one article about that. There was a study in the United States that came out where they put cameras on 100 different riders of various skill levels, and they learned an awful lot. And some of the reasons why people crash are, yes, speed. If you go too fast to be able to stop in time, you go too fast, faster than you feel comfortable, then you're going to get into trouble. In the States, about half of the motorcycle fatalities are single vehicle crashes, which means that it's just the rider and a corner, typically. There was no other vehicle involved. So that's about half. So once you start to focus on the skill level and the competence of a rider and their ability to handle a motorcycle in a corner, then we're addressing most of these situations that we need to for minimizing fatalities. And the other half is going to be multiple vehicle collisions, about strategies for being seen and for predicting situational awareness and predicting what could happen. That's where you get to be, that's how you're going to prevent the crashes that involve multiple vehicles. Well, the other thing is that to have the skills to maneuver the motorcycle either by swerving or coming to an emergency stop, in case that driver, despite all of your strategies, the driver still comes out in front of you, and then you'll need to be able to stop in time and not panic, because panic comes when we don't feel in control. And it could very well be even the most masterful riders can crash into the side of a car. So it's a matter of doing the best you can, and do it for your family, if not for yourself, because if you get into an accident and you are, badly injured, they're the ones that are going to have to take care of you. So don't be selfish by thinking that, I'll be fine and I don't need to wear a helmet, or I don't need to wear a gear, and I don't need to train. I'll be fine. I've been fine for 10 years. I'll be fine from here forward. That's not a good strategy. That's something that's, you're really putting to fate. And one other phrase that I have used for many years is that the perception that most riders have is that with seat time, they've been riding for 30 years. Why do I need training? The reality is that they have 1 year of experience or skill development repeated 30 times. So they really haven't become any better rider. They've just done the same thing over and over and over. And that's the idea that when you practice, right, you practice the correct techniques. That's what's going to make you a better rider, not just riding and continuing to repeat your bad techniques or your bad habits. And that's where a trained instructor can see, they can look at you and follow you, and they can identify the habits that you have that you didn't even know that you had. I'll say, do you know that you turn too early in corners? I said, no, I didn't know that. I said, well, you do, and here's why. Nervous riders turn in too early. It's like, oh, but I don't feel nervous. I said, well, you're reacting in a way that you feel as though you are going to run off the road, so you turn in too early. It's very common. It's what humans do. So the fact is that when you turn in too early, look at the exit. You're now pointed toward the oncoming lane or the edge of the road. So and then you have to fix that. So a rider who's not aware that that's a problem, you have to identify the fact that they don't want to be pointed toward danger. They want to be pointed toward safety, which is down the road at the exit of the corner. So you identify the fact that they're turning in too early. You tell them what the motivation is for why do you want to turn in a little later, the dynamics of the motorcycle, that it takes time for the motorcycle to turn. How do you get the motorcycle to turn quickly, which is counter steering? There's a lot to it. It's actually not very complex, but it's not simple. So I should say there's a simplicity to it, but it's not necessarily easy to apply all the simple points, because it's really only brakes, throttle, and handlebars. Those are your three basic controls. So it's either stopping, going, or turning. And now it's a matter of refining each action so that you've got the results that you need to be safer, but also to have more fun and to feel more confident.
Let me please ask you my last question. Can you please give me one, but the most important global advice from professional to beginner rider?
Keep the attitude and the perception that you have as a beginner and carry it into beyond where you think you are experienced and competent. So always ride as though you know there's more to learn. So when you start off, there's a lot to learn. You're going to feel as though you learned, everything in a very short period of time. Well, you learned a lot, and enough that made it so that you can call yourself a motorcycle rider. That's great. But understand, still have your attitude that you still know that there's more and more and more to learn. That would be something that's going to allow you to not only be safer and ride with less risk, but it's going to lead to the conditions that we've started talking about being, in the moment, in the zone, one with your motorcycle. And the pleasure is just so much greater when you can experience it that way.
Thank you so much, Mr. Condon. It was very, very interesting to hear your all explanation. Thank you very much for having some time for our interview.
Thank you very much. All right. Bye-bye.